Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading John Locke's second treatise on government. Today is we're going to be divided. This is the final chapter, chapter 19, titled "Dissolution of Government." I'm going to break this in two parts because this is the longest chapter. This is the longest chapter of this. It has 33 sections. It is in other words, he starts out with one of the shortest chapters and he ends with the longest chapter. And this is about the changing of governments. When does a government cease to be, legitimately cease to be, and you transition? You end one government, you dissolve it, and then you create the new government. Okay, this is the idea of dissolving government, and this is the end of his treatise and the first treatise, second treatise, government. Sorry. Um, I'm going to break it up. I'm going to go to, I think I'm going to, I made an arbitrary decision that is to go to section 227 of it, so that we could argue that maybe we could go beyond there. So I'll go from 211 to 227, and then 227 to 243 is the end. So that's literally half, basically near half. And we'll break it in two sections. So today, part one, and then part two will be tomorrow, and we'll end this at the end of the week, and we can have the weekend to transition into the next project, which I will flip and decide soon. You'll get the notice about it soon. Uh, Maybe you get the notice already, by seeing this. I hope to have it already by the time you see this. Okay, let's go look into it. Dissolution of Government. Section 211. He that will, with any clearness, speak to the dissolution of government, ought, in the first place, to distinguish between the dissolution of society and the dissolution of government. So, distinguishing between in other words, the society and government. Now, by the society, he means the Commonwealth, the body politic, right? The body politic. See, this is the problem: is what is the government? Is it the body politic? No. The social contract creates the society or the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth and society. So, what is society and what is the Commonwealth? That's something he's not really fully. He's been playing that back and forth. Okay, and this is not clear. In other words, this idea of and then the government is remember, the government is not synonymous with Commonwealth. Commonwealth and government are not the same thing. That governments are it is a subordinate aspect of the Commonwealth. Okay, so here let's look at this. What goes in here, right? In other words, distinguish between first evolution of society and government, that which makes the community and brings men out of the loose state of nature into one political society is the agreement that everyone has with the rest to incorporate and to act as one body and to be one distinct commonwealth. Okay, this is what society is, the commonwealth, right? And the usual and almost only way thereby this union is dissolved is the inroad of foreign force making a conquest upon them. For in that case, not being able to maintain and support themselves as one entire and independent body, the union belonging to that body which consists therein, which necessary cease, and so every man returns to the state where he was before, with a liberty to shift for himself and to provide for his own safely, and he thinks fit, and in some other society. So, wait a minute. Oh, this is where I really lose Locke. Locke seems to understand that everything is the individual, and individual actors, and there's no binding things like family ties, ethnic ties. In other words, so that what happens here is that we all, as rational little economic actors, come together to create a society. But then when some power comes and destroys this, invades us, and destroys the bonds that hold us together, and they destroy society. They may destroy the Commonwealth, but the people remain, right? To what degree does a nation or a people in government are, do this is the question of government and people, the social form and the political form, the social body and the political body. That the social body may come. I mean, one way we can argue what comes first, chicken or egg, right? Social body, political body. Locke here seems to be talking about individual actors. This idea of the individual. There's everything is from the point of view of the individual and the individual actor, and then he escapes the inconvenience of nature in order benefit to improve. He joins Commonwealth to escape the inconveniences of nature and to escape the negative effects. And but when this is destroyed, he reverts back to this individual, and he makes the best deal he can. Right. This is what Locke seems to be saying here: is that a foreign force comes and destroys everything. Da 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 da. Now, and his liberty to shift for himself and provide for his own safety as he thinks fit in some other society. Whenever the society is dissolved, and it is certain the government of that society cannot remain. Thus, conquerors' swords often cut up governments by the root and mangle society to pieces, separating the subdued or scattered multitudes from the protection of and dependence on that society which ought to have preserved them from violence. The world is too well instructed in this, and too forward of to allow of this way of dissolving of governments to need any more be said of it. Okay, but I'm sorry, everyone knows about this, but do they? Because we have. I am not. I don't think he is adequately. I mean, his idea of the origins of government worked a certain way, and the bounding of social contract begins a certain way. Is his anthropology correct? And is the psychology anthropology that Locke advocates is really real? It's nice and logical, but is it real? I'm arguing. I'm going to argue no. And Locke knows it, and therefore he has to do all these rhetorical tricks and acts of these nice rational arguments in order to concoct a perception of a reality that isn't. Now, I know some people say, "Oh, you're being unkind to him." No, but I think this is the problem. This right here, he does not offer us a way to understand. He really doesn't want to talk about dissolution of society, but he has to, because what is the body politic but the society? And if the society breaks down, will the government or the body politic survive? No. He assumes that this is the synonymous creation. Then he only gives up the example of an outside force. What about an inside force? What happens to changes within the body politic that finally makes it no longer what it was? This is where Aristotle is night. This is the Locke offers us no understanding of what really dissolves a government, a society. His argument here is focusing only on the government because he thinks that, because societies are dissolved only by this external force, right? Conquering. No. And this is where, in fact, even Thucydides in his Peloponnesian War has a better understanding of this. That usually governments rise and fall, but in other words, the breaking of a government can create the destruction. A bad government can lead to the destruction of the society. And that the civil war can lead to the destruction of the society. Not only destruction of the government is dead, the government has already died. It's the society is dead. In fact, isn't that the whole point? It's the public good of the society, not the political government. Not the good of the government, but the good of the society is the public good. The public good is the common good of everyone that's in the society, not who's in the government. The government is only a representative actor here. So let's look about this, right? We don't have to talk about this anymore. He seems to say, right? Um, there's no more need of it. It wants much a need any more to be said of it, and there wants not much argument to prove that where the society is dissolved, the government can only remain. That being impossible, for as the frame of a house subsists when the material of it so scattered and dissipates, and the whirlwind or jumbled into a complete heap of an earthquake. So he's not going to talk about the breaking of it. Besides this overturning from without, governments are dissolved within them. Okay, so this is what he's saying, that societies, this overturning it out is easy and obvious. Comes in and you break up governments and you break up societies as well. But governments are dissolved from within. But what about societies? How is that? Can that not be also dissolved by within? Okay, I'm not going to go any further. I don't want to make this too long. First, you give this from within. Case first, when the legislative is altered, civil society being a state of peace amongst those who are of it, from whom the state of war is excluded as an umbrage. In other words, we're in a state of civil society, we can't use the state of war as a mechanism to be umbrage. But what about the right to appeal to heaven? Okay, stop. Which they have provided in their legislature for the ensuing all differences that may arise amongst any of them. It is in their legislature, and the members of a commonwealth all are united and combined together into one coherent living body. This is the soul that gives a form, life, and unity to the commonwealth. So therefore, the creation, in other words, them forming it and the agreement that they've created to create this institution, this is the soul that gives life, gives form, life, unity to that commonwealth. And hence, the several members have their mutual influence, sympathy, and connection. In other words, therefore, this is the creating of society. The Commonwealth and the Commonwealth society are. This is what I call the fundamental Hobbesian Lockean problem: the state and the society, the Commonwealth and the society, the state, Commonwealth, civitas, what you want to call it, and the society. They're the same, but they're different. He talks about the formation of both at the same time with the social contract, but then he doesn't really describe the one or the other. He really describes the formation of society, but the formation of the government is synonymous. The formation of the state and the society occurs at the same time. In fact, they are identical twins. The social contract produces identical twins. These twins are the society and the state. Okay. What does this? They both do? The mutual influence, they create a bond. Hence, several members, all the members who create the society, have mutual influence, sympathy, and connection. And therefore, when the legislature is broken or dissolved, delusion and death follows. In other words, of the government, right? So the government is another kind of subcontract within the social contract. It seems to me that way, that the government is formed as part of the society. So when the society is created, they create and the Commonwealth is created, they create the government to exercise it. So it's the secondary contract, the secondary agreement upon that emerges after the first agreement. So once you have a society, you need to have a government. But this is not the state. The state, the society and the state are one, and that the state, the government, is the exercising aspect of. See, this is a mistake. This is where it can get confusing. If you confuse government or the Commonwealth and the government, the state with the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth with the government, then whoa. But the Commonwealth and state, Commonwealth, society, and state are one. and government is something else, and commonwealth government does not equal commonwealth and does not equal state. So therefore, that exists in a society consisting of one will. In other words, they agree that existing or dissolved death follows. For the existence and union of a society consists of having one will. So the essence and union of society consists of having one will, the legislative. When one once establishes by the majority, declaring has declaring, and as it were, keeping of that will. The constitution of the legislature is the first and fundamental act of society, whereby provision is made for the continuation of the union under the directions of persons and bonds of law made by persons authorized thereto by the consent and appointment by the people, without which no one man or number of men amongst them can have authority of making laws that shall be binding on the rest. When any one or more shall take upon them to make laws, whom the people have not appointed to do so, they make laws without authority, which the people are not therefore bound to obey. Semicolon. By which means they come again to be out of subjection, and may construe to themselves a new legislature as they think best, being in full liberty to resist the force of those whose authority, those who without authority would impose anything upon them. So even in society, if someone in society says, okay, I'm going to claim this authority. No, the body politic has not authorized you. We did not create you to exercise. We are going to create. We, the society, creates the legislature. But if you now say, I'm going to, his idea is that the provision of this is to do this. He says, but what happens made by persons authorized unto, right? We create people authorized to this by the consent and appointment by people, which no man, one man or number of men can have the authority of making laws binding on the rest, right? When anyone who has not been authorized to make laws, you don't have to obey them. And if they are the people making it, no one has set up, if there's not been, at the creation of society, if one or two group of men saying, hey, we're going to make laws, no one is. If the people have not consented to this, if they have not consented, they don't have to obey them. Okay, and then therefore there is this weird thing here, like this, right? Shall be, in other words, they have they are not to be obeyed, and by which means they may come out of subjection, and may constitute themselves a new legislature, as they think best, being in full liberty to resist the force of those who, without authority, would impose anything on them. Everyone is at the disposure of his own will, or when those who had, by the delegation of the society, the declaring of the public will, are excluded from it, and others usurp the place, who have no such authority or delegation. So therefore, he's saying everything is back at the public will. But wait a minute, society still exists. You're saying that the people are thrown back to the state of nature? Everyone is up left to themselves? See the Locke here seems to forget that there are such things as social habits, social norms, social things that predates even law. There's habits and behaviors of social groups, families, clans, groups that have almost law-like binding on people's behavior. That if you fail to comply, others will shame you or silence you, or not recognize you. In other words, this is social. This is the social forces, right? The social force of exclusion, inclusion. In other words, and the mechanisms by which we allow you, enter, and respect you, not show disrespect, ignore you. In other words, this is the way societies put peer pressure and things like that. Are the mechanisms of social pressure, right? not law, social pressure, right? We distinguish between the law is the act of government, right? Law is the act of government, magistrates. These are not the society, nor the state itself. They are the representative agent of the state and society. They are the government is nothing more than the creation of the thing that is created by the state and society to execute, to set up things like legislatures and executives, to do things, magistrates, and that therefore they carry this thing. This is what he talks about here. And that everyone is at the disposal of his own will in that situation, right? And those who had, by delegation of society, the declaration of public will are excluded from it. Therefore, the society has chosen, the people of society has delegated this to this for declaring the public will, are excluded from it, and others usurp that place who have no authority to do so. Therefore, everyone is back at their will. This is, well, everything resorts back to the state of nature almost. But wait a minute, but isn't that doesn't the state of nature only occurs when the society is broken down? Again, this is the inconsistency in Locke. This is because he has not clearly defined things. He's fuzzy. This is his fuzzy logic. This is his, he's constantly done his whole argument here looks very good. But that's because he's been using terms very fuzzy. And therefore, the clear lack of clear definition. This is where he and Hobbes differ. Hobbes likes very definition defined. Locke doesn't. Locke likes to blur things. So it makes it easier to make an argument. And this is rhetorically bad faith. When you engage in such rhetorical tricks of changing definition or altering things, or not having clearly defined definitions, so they're vague, or they're worded in such a way so that they're not clear. So we're not clear what is the difference. We know there's a distinction, but we're not sure about the distinction between state and society. We don't know. We know that there is dissolution of a society, but we're not going to talk about this. We're talking about the dissolution of government. But then the dissolution of government looks like the dissolution of society, because we're reverted. Once it reverts, we all act back as though we're in the state of nature, and that there is not a society. But there is a society. Huh? If you're confused, everyone's confused here, because this is the point of Locke. This is one of the problems and frustrations of Locke, in that sense. 213. This being usually brought about by such in a commonwealth who misuse the power they have, it is hard to consider it a right, and know at whose door it lays, at whose door to lay it, without knowing the form of government in which it happens. Let us suppose then the legislature placed in the concurrence of three distinct persons. One, a single hereditary person with consent, supreme executive power, and with the power of convoking and dissolving the other two within a certain period of time. Two, an assembly of hereditary nobles. And three, an assembly of representatives of people pro tempore by the people. Such a form of government supposed is evident. So therefore, there's three things: a single hereditary executive with supreme executive power, and they can convoke into these other two. This is one assembly of the nobility, and the other one is that. So this is the structure of the government. He's going to give an example here of this situation. Three distinct persons. The first is a hereditary person, then the assembly of that is another person, and the third person is the assembly of the representatives, chosen by the people, pro tempore by the people. First, section 214, first, that when such a single person, a prince, set up by his arbitrary will in place of the law, which are the will of the society, declared by the legislature, when the legislature is changed, that for that being in effect the legislature, whose rules and laws are put in execution, and were to be obeyed, when other laws are set up and other rules pretended and enforced than what the legislature constituted by the society have enacted, it is plain that the legislative is changed. Whomever introduces new laws, being thereinto authorized by the fundamental appointment of the society, or subverts old the old, disowns and overturns the power by which they were made, and then sets up a new legislature. So the first case is the prince, a prince of this power, who's somehow something has happened, and the legislature, he set up a new, different legislature. He sets up a body, not the one that was authorized by the people, the society. It's one now that he is, the laws themselves has created, that an outgoing parliament was, or something happens, and he, through the acts of that outgoing parliament, creates a new parliament, and then therefore not by the society, not by the people, but by this means of this king or this actor, be it that of the parliament itself or that of the one of the house, the senior house, and some collection of the two, either one of these three people, right? 215. Secondly, when the prince hinders the legislator from assembling in due time and from acting freely, pursuant to those ends for which it was constituted, the legislature is altered. So therefore, wait a minute. If I don't let the, if we've agreed to a legislature, and if I now don't form it, don't hold it, don't call it, and don't allow it to form, and don't allow it to do what it's doing, then now I've altered the legislature, he says. For it is not a certain number of men, no, nor their meeting, unless they have the freedom of debating and the leisure of perfecting that is what is for the good of the society, wherein the legislative consists, whereas the legislature consists. In other words, that is the purpose of the legislature, is to consist for the making what of the good, making laws and things that are good for the good of society. When these are taken away or altered, so to deprive the society of the due exercise of their power, the legislature is truly altered. For it is not names that constitute governments, but the uses and exercises of those powers that were intended to accompany them. Semicolon. So therefore, it's not that things that names themselves don't constitute the government. Therefore, if I create this legislature and I create this, it's legislature, see, it's legislature. No, the legislature has been constituted by the people, constituted by society to execute. And to do what? Execute laws or things done for the public good. So if whoever, the king, the parliament itself, or the either in the higher lords or the lower lords, whatever, all of a sudden create a new body and say this body has all the power, and they can do what it wants. It doesn't have to do, whatever it says is dictate. This is changing the legislature. You've altered the legislature. That's just because it's called the legislature, because it's called the parliament, doesn't mean it's the legislature in that sense. It's when they exercise that thing, right? Let's do this. So that's truly altered. For it is not names that constitute God, but the uses and exercises of those powers that were to be intended to accompany them. So that he who takes away the freedom or hinders the acting of the legislature in its due season, in effect takes away the legislature and puts an end to the government. So if they do that, then therefore the original government of these three parts, whoever changes it for whatever reason, they prevent the legislature from coming back into session or doing things or being the actual legislature, they alter it, they prevent it. He says, in effect, they put an end to government. Thirdly, this is 216. When by arbitrary power of the prince, the electors or ways of election are altered without the consent and contrary to the interest of the people. So therefore, not without the consent, but also contrary to the interest of the people. So remember, what happens if something can be altered without the consent, but for the benefit of the people might be allowed as prerogative. But it's now not only arbitrary without consent, it's now contrary to the interest of the people. That also the legislative is altered. So therefore, this is, in other words, if the electors or the way of election are altered without the consent, and this is done contrary to the interest of the people, this is a bit altered. And if other than those whom the society has authorized thereto do choose or in any way than what the society has prescribed, those chosen are not the legislative appointed by the people. So therefore, someone else can create this and choose them and do that. Therefore, in other words, we've changed the way we're going to select things, and that we're not going to do it the way the government, the thing that created by the society has authorized. We're now doing it by a different way. That we've made a law that the king gets to do whatever he wants to it, or the higher lords can appoint whoever they want to the other things, elections, and that, or they create a body to elect people, to select them. Like, I'm going to have a board to decide who can be a member of parliament. So we're going to have race and gender issues, and we're going to have a special council that will vet every proportion of men of parliament to only let certain people be by their race, gender, or whatever to be selected members of parliament. Well, that is an alteration of government, he says, if the people themselves has not done it. Oh. Fourthly, not chosen by the public. 217, fourthly, the delivery also of the people into subjection of a foreign power, either by the prince or the legislature, is certainly the change of the legislature, and so a dilution of the government. For the end why people enter into society, being to be preserved in one entire free independent society, to be governed by its own laws, this is lost when they are given up into power of another. So wait a minute. So when the legitimately elected people decide to make an agreement that we're going to join the European Union, unless the people have agreed to it, this is the problem about this, right? This is why the idea, well, we have to have a referendum, right? Unless you have a referendum, it's not legitimate, right? This is this idea here, right? Okay. In other words, this is again, but if you subject, you brought it to other people, then your legislature has been dissolved. Mm-hmm. 218, section 218. Why, in such a constitution as this, the division of the government in these cases is so to be imputed to the prince is evident, because he, having the force, treasure, and office of the state to employ, and often persuading himself or being flattered by others that as supreme magistrate he is incapable of control. He alone, that as supreme magistrate, he is incapable of control, and in other words, he can't be controlled. And he alone is in a condition to make great advances towards such changes under pretense of lawful authority, and has in his hands to terrify or suppress oppressors as factious, seditious, and enemies of the government, to the government, whereas no other part of the legislature or people is capable by themselves to attempt any alteration of the legislature without open and visible rebellion apt enough to be taken notice of, which, when it prevails, produces effect little different from foreign conquest. Besides, the prince, in such a form of government, having the power of dissolving the other parts of the legislature and thereby rendering them private persons, they can never, in opposition to him, um, uh, 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 or without his concurrence, alter the legislature by a law, his consent being necessary to give any of their decrees sanction. But yet, so far as the other parts of the legislature any way contribute to any attempt upon the government, and either promote or not what lies in them, hinder such designs, they are guilty and partake in this, which is entirely the greatest crime which men can partake of one towards another. So therefore conspiring to deprive the political government. So the king is bad enough, but when other people work with him to do that, this is the greatest crime that one can partake against the other. Section 1, 219. There is one way more whereby such a government may be dissolved. That is, when he who has supreme executive power neglects and abandons that charge, so that the laws already made can no longer be put in execution. Obama and Biden, by not enforcing laws, or anyone political office, not enforcing the law, This is Locke seems to suggest that the failure to enforce the law creates the dissolution of government. So laws already made cannot belong in execution. This is demonstrably to reduce all to anarchy and effectually to dissolve the government. For laws not being made for themselves, but to be by their execution the bonds of society, to keep every part of the body politic in its due place and function. When that totally ceases, the government visibly ceases. And when the people become a confused multitude without order or connection, connection. Mhm. In other words, they become this is what is this? This famous line of oh come on, beep 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 beep. Sam Francis, that famous line from Sam Francis. Sorry, I was blanking on the name. Sam Francis made a thing called terreno anarchy. In other words, that we today live in a situation where the official government officials, decide to create anarchy and therefore this anarchy is going to create tyranny. In other words, that we're going to just simply not enforce laws. The police are not going to enforce the law. In other words, defund the police, or the refusal to enforce enforced bordering of the American border, letting the illegal immigrations just come in, and then not simply just ignoring the immigration law. This Locke would say is a form of devolving the government. In other words, dissolving the government by what? Creating anarcho tyranny. Okay. In other words, this is a form of anarcho tyranny that Sam talked about. I think he's right. I think his understanding of this is correct. This is the new way of doing this. They want to, and they need to do this because what Kolakowski says: anarchy is the handmaiden of tyranny. Right? That in the state of tyranny, anarchy will be so horrible and people so terrified they will submit to arbitrary authority. Okay, so this is what's so interesting here in a sense. So this is demonstrably reduced to all to anarchy and effectually to dissolve the government for law not being made for themselves, but to be by their execution the bonds of society, to keep every part of the body politic with due place and function, that totally ceases, the government visibly ceases, and the people become a confused multitude without order and connection, where there is no longer the administration of justice for the securing of men's rights, nor any remaining power within the community to direct the force or to provide for the necessity of the public. There certainly is no government left. Where the laws cannot be executed, it is all one as if they were no laws. And a government without law is, I suppose, a mystery in politics, unconceivable to human capacity and inconsistent with human society. Sorry, I got a phone call and had to answer it. Uh, so this is a very thing about this, right? He says no government left. He says that where there no longer is administrative justice for the securing of men's right, nor remaining the power in the community to direct force provided necessity public, there certainly is no government left. Where laws cannot be executed, it is all one. It is all one as if there were no laws, and government without law is a mystery in it's supposed a mystery in politics, unconceivable to human capacity, and inconsistent with human society. So it's not only that, but therefore it's inconsistent with human society. In other words, so there's something interesting here from that point of view. This connection between laws and society. Okay, this is section 220. In these and like cases where the government is dissolved, the people are at liberty to provide for themselves, erecting a new legislature, differing from the other, by changing of persons or forms or both, as they shall find it most for their safety and good. For the society can never, by the fault of another, lose the native and original right it has to preserve itself. There was a natural right to self-preservation, right? Which can only be done by a settled legislature and a fair and impartial execution of the law made by it. In other words, you can only take someone's life when it's done by justly, and then otherwise it's kind of all against all, right? But the state of mankind is not so miserable that they are not capable of using this remedy, till it be too late to look for any. In other words, human conditions are not so miserable that they're incapable of using the remedy of defending themselves, till it is too late to look for any. In other words, beyond any hope. To tell people they may provide for themselves by erecting new legislature, when by oppression, artifice, or being delivered over to a foreign power, their old one is gone, is only to tell them that they may expect relief when it's too late, and the evil is past cure. So therefore, just by saying that, so it's, in other words, this idea is too late. In other words, you always have the right to fix this and defend yourself, but to do this when it's too late, that you can't do anything. It's pointless. This is in other words, by electing a new legislature when the opposition by opposition, artifice, or being delivered to a new foreign policy, their old one is gone, is only to tell them that they may expect relief when it is too late, or when the evil is past cure. This is in effect no more than to bid them the first to be slaves, and then to take care of their liberty. And when their chains are on, tell them they may act like freemen. This, if barely so, is rather modest mockery than relief, and men can never be secure from tyranny. In other words, men can never, if they cannot act before that, they can only act then, it's too late to act, then men will never be secured from tyranny. If there are no means to escape it till they are perfectly under it, and therefore it is that they not only have a right to get out of it, but to prevent it. So not only do you have a right to not to be do it, but you can prevent it. This is the other thing. You have a right not only to not have tyranny imposed upon you, but you have a right to prevent it. Because otherwise, if you only have the right to oppose it in that sense of stop it, and it's too late in that sense. It's going to be upon you already, right? He's saying it's preemptive. The right here is not only actual; it's preemptive to remove this. It is therefore, secondly, another way whereby government is dissolved. That is, when the legislature or the prince, either of them, acts contrary to their trust. The first, the legislature acts against the trust reposed in them, when they endeavor to invade the property of their subjects and to make themselves or any part of the community masters or arbitrary disposers of the lives, liberties, and fortune of the people. By this thing, the Great Society and much of social welfare policy is this. Locke here says, if you follow Locke, then the second government of Parliament passes laws and things to take the property from one people to give it to another. Well, you dissolve government. Okay, this is why libertarians like Locke, right? This is why libertarians like Locke, and liberals kind of like modern liberals don't like Locke that much because Locke says what you're doing is naughty, 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 naughty. Section 222. The reason why men enter into society is the preservation of their property, and the end why they choose and authorize a legislature is that they may, by laws, There may be by laws made a set of rules as guards and fences to the properties of all members of society to limit the power and to moderate the dominion of every part and member of society. So, since it can never be supposed to be the will of the society that the legislature should have the power to destroy that which every one desires to secure by entering the society, and for which the people submitted themselves to a legislature of their own making. Semicolon. Wherever the legislature endeavors to take away and destroy the property of the people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power, they put themselves in a state of war with the people, who are themselves dissolved from any further obedience, and are left to the common refuge, which God hath provided all men against force and violence. So okay. So therefore, once a legislature or anybody, an actor, a prince, a magistrate, or even a legislature, they pass laws to take away, to destroy, to take away and endeavors to take away and destroy the property people, or to reduce them to slavery under arbitrary power. They are making war with the people, and that the people have the right to resist and defend themselves. Whensoever the legislature shall transgress this fundamental rule of society, and either by ambition, fear, folly, or corruption endeavor to grasp themselves, or put in their hands any other and absolute power over the lives, liberty, and estates of people, by this breach of trust they forfeit the power the people had put in their hands for quite contrary ends, and it dissolves to the people, who have a right to resume their original liberty, and by the establishment of the new legislature, such as they shall think fit, provide for their own safety and security, and which is the end for which they are in society. What I have said here concerns the legislator in general, holds true also concerning the supreme executor, who, having a double trust put on him, both to have a part in the legislative and the supreme execution of the laws, acts against both when he goes about to set up his own arbitrary will as the law of society. He acts also contrary to his trust, which he either employed by force, treasure, and office of the society to corrupt the representatives to gain them to his purposes, or openly pre-engages the electors and prescribes to their choices such whom he has, by solicitation, threats, promises, or otherwise, won to his designs, and employs them to bring in such who have promised beforehand what to vote and what to enact. Okay, in other words, there's a conspiracy. The king used his ability to bribe, corrupt that members of the legislature, and both chambers in that sense. And then what does he do? You corrupt them, make them, and then before the election, we make the deal that I threaten doing anything. You will only be elected and chosen if you do what I tell you to do. Otherwise, you won't be elected. I won't have you selected. In other words, that this is doing what? This is the corruption of the system. Through his trust, he employs force, treasure, and office of society to corrupt the representatives, right? So thus to regulate candidates and electors, and the new model, the way of elections. What is it but to cut up the government by the roots and poison the very foundation of public security? For the people, having reserved to themselves the choices of their representatives as the fence of their properties, could it be for no other end but that they might always be freely chosen and be chosen, and so chosen freely act and advise as necessary necessary of the Commonwealth, and the public good should, upon examination and mature debate, be judged to require. In other words, this is they're chosen and what be done, right? This is in other words, they should be freed to do this. That one said that in denying that those who give their votes before they hear the debate and have weighed the reasons on all sides, are not capable of doing. In other words, if I sold my right, I said I would do whatever you do me, and I've agreed to this. So therefore, all this, this is even a very powerful argument against interest group politics, right? In other words, the interest groups that pay campaigns of people, or campaigns, or political parties, and their selection of people who are going to be candidates. And you must have, in other words, this seems to basically say, oh, they're political party, no conception of political parties, none of the structures of interest group politics and things like this. All of this would be seen in this logic here as a form of violation of the. This is why Locke is also self-destructive in our modern politics. He has no concepts of political parties, no concepts of interest groups and the way things work in a modern. But maybe in Locke's view, this is not society. This is modern interest string is a form of new tyranny, right? This is how some people might argue. Those who give their votes before they hear the debate have weighed all the reasons and all sides are not capable of doing. To prepare such an assembly as this and to endeavor to set up declared arbiters of his own will for the true representatives of the people and the lawmakers of society is certainly as great a breach of trust and as a perfect declaration of a design to subvert the government as is possible to be met with. In other words, to do such things as to engage a clear act of destroying the government, overthrowing the government, as anything that can be, right? To which, if one shall add rewards and punishments visibly employed to the same effect, and all the arts of perverted law made use of, to take off and destroy all that stands in the way of such design, and will not comply and consent to betray the liberties of their own country, it will be past doubt what is doing. In other words, if he does this and he punishes those who try to object them and stop them, no doubt what power they ought to have in this society, who thus, in other words, what power they ought to have in the society, who thus employs it contrary to the trust went along with it in the first institution, is easy to determine. And one cannot but see that he who has once attempted any such thing as this cannot any way longer be trusted. So therefore, this is saying if you've done it, you try to subvert it, and you can't say, "Oh, I've learned." Once you've done these kind of things in the past, you cannot be trusted before. You have to be denied the right to. You can't be trusted. So someone who has done these things. That's why we can make an argument that no sitting Democrat who's done these things, and only political parties who've ignored the law, should ever be allowed to hold public trust ever again. There should be a rule that every Democrat and every city government and every state that has ignored the law, refused to carry out the things, and is engaged in these kind of activities, Locke would say, no, you can't trust them ever again. You're stupid, because they've clearly shown that they cannot be trusted in that sense, Locke would say. They've done these shenanigans before. You're stupid if you think they're going to not do them again. Just because they say they're going to be different. But then voters do this all the time. Voters, they promised not to do it. And then after you're like, lied. And they do it again, okay? It's a kind of Lucy from Peanuts with the football, right? Here's the football, Charlie Brown. You can kick it. I'm not going to move football. And then he comes up and whoop, flat, right? Lucy always moves the football. So when she don't believe what she says, she's going to do it. You're stupid if you're going to go. Charlie Brown is an idiot for trusting Lucy. Therefore, in a society where the government executors have done these bad things and the politicians who have done these things, it's silly just because they say, "Oh, I learned my lesson. I'm not going to do it now." No. 223. To this, perhaps it will be said that the people, being ignorant and always discontented to lay the foundations of government in the unsteady opinion and uncertain humor of the people. It is, in other words, it is unsteady. In other words, to founder in the unsteady opinions and uncertain humors of the people. To lay government in the unsteady opinions and uncertain humors of the people is to expose it to certain rule, and no government will be long be will be able long to subsist if the people may set up a new legislature whenever they take offense to the oath. To this I answer quite the contrary. People are not so easily got out of their old forms, as some are apt to suggest. In other words, this is prudence. This is that famous line in Declaration of Independence: "Prudence dictates," right? To suggest they are hardly to be prevailed with to amend the acknowledged faults of the frame of government that they have been accustomed to, and if there be any original defects or advantageous ones introduced by time or corruption, it is not easy thing to get them changed, even when all the world sees there is an opportunity for it. This slowness and aversion in the people to quit their old constitutions has in the many revolutions that have been seen in this kingdom, in this and former ages, still keep us to, and after some interval of fruitless attempts, still brought us back again to uh, our old legislative king, lords, and commons, and whatever provocations have made the crown be taken some form of our princes' heads, they never carried the people so far as to place it on another line. In other words, they might kill this, but they brought back Charles, and that even they're going to put it. They're going to take. In other words, even when women marry, and even when they bring the Hanoverians, it's because of the line of that a Stuart, daughter of a Stuart, a previous Stuart, married the Hanoverian, and therefore the line of Sophia, is technically a Stuart. And the Stuarts were originally tied to through marriage through the Tudors, and the first Tudor, right? In that sense, right? So we have this problem here, this idea that even though we have something that looks like a breach of that, is not. In fact, even Tudor is a breach, but they make every pretense that it's not, right? The double-sided aspects of the Tudor line, right? So therefore, um, in other words, even the English have not had a situation where they've made another line a king in that sense. 224. But it will be said, this hypothesis lays a ferment for further frequent rebellion. To which I answer, this is the threefold things. First, no more than any other hypothesis, for when the people are made miserable and find themselves exposed to ill usage by arbitrary power, cries up their governors as much as cry up their governors as much as you will, for sons of Jupiter. Let them be sacred and divine, descend or authorized from heaven. Give them out for whom or what you please. The same will happen. In other words, let's make a difference. If that is that, even if they're from sons of God, sons of these wonderful things, the same result will happen. He says, the people generally ill-treated and contrary to right will be ready upon any occasion to ease themselves of a burden that sits heavy upon them. They will wish and seek for the opportunity when in which in the change, weakness, and accident of human affairs seldom delays long to offer itself. In other words, sometimes it's because of weakness of they wait an opportunity, but sometimes which in change, weakness, and accident of human affairs seldom delays offer itself. In other words, weakness, change, weakness, and accident produces the occasion, right? He must have lived but a little while in this world who has not seen examples of this all the time. And he must have read very little who cannot produce examples of it in all the sorts of governments in the world. Okay, that's the first thing, right? In other words, this is going to happen. In other words, this is not true. Most people will. It doesn't matter what their government is in this thing, the situation. In other words, that they, if you put too much burden on them, they will resist. This is the first thing. Second, 225. Secondly, I answer such revolution happens not often, even little mismanagement. In other words, such revolutions happen not under every little mismanagement in public affairs. In other words, this is not going to happen because of every little mismanagement. Great mistakes in the ruling part, many wrongs and inconvenient laws, and all the slips of human frailty will be borne by the people without mutiny or murmur. But if a long train of abuses, provocations, and artifices, all tending the same way, makes a design visible to the people, that they cannot but feel what they lie under, and see whither they are going, it is not to be wondered that they should then rouse themselves and endeavor to put the rule into such hands which may secure them the ends for which government was first enacted, and without which ancient names and species forms are so much far from being, in other words, are so far from being better than they are much worse than the state of nature, pure anarchy, and the inconvenience being all as great and near, but the remedy farther off and more difficult. So therefore he's saying, what is this? We avoid the state of nature, right? But tyranny is worse. Arbitrary tyranny is worse than the state of nature. So we escape nature to get good government, but if you're going to give us bad government, this is going to be worse than the state of nature. And therefore this dissolves it. In other words, we entered in this for public good, not for the public harm. We didn't make you God. This is what he's saying here. So therefore, but then if there's not any mismanagement, he's saying that people will put up with a lot, he's saying here. People will put up a lot. Again, this is the Declaration of Independence, that line about prudence would dictate. People, they would stay with inconvenient. They will put up with a lot of things. It's only when they're convinced that this is going to, they can't take it anymore. They just can't take anymore. Thirdly, I answer that this doctrine of power and the people of providing for their safety anew by a new legislature, when their legislature has acted contrary to their trust by invading their property, is the best fence against rebellion, and probably means to hinder it. For rebellion being an oppression, not in persons but authority, opposition to not to persons but authority, which is founded only in the Constitution and laws of government. Those, whomever they be, whom by force break through and by force justify their violations of them, are truly and properly rebels. Therefore, the rebels are not the people who want the law restrained. It's the people who are violating the law by doing these acts. In other words, by ignoring the law, using their power to do things contrary to the law, or to do things that without the authority of law, doing things to benefit themselves. These are the rebels. So the rebels aren't the people opposing the violations, it's the people doing the violations. See, Locke's playing a nice trick. He's flipped the definition of who's the real rebel. It's not the one opposing the violations are the rebel, it's the people doing the violations are the rebel. They are truly and properly rebels. For when men, by entering into society and civil government, have excluded force and introduced law for the preservation of property, peace, and unity amongst themselves, those who set up force against in opposition to laws do rebel, are, that is, bring back against the state of war, and are properly rebels, which they who are in power, by their pretense they have to authority, and temptation of force they have in their hands, and flattery of those about them, like being likeliest to do. The properest way to prevent the evil is to show them the danger and injustice of it, and and who are under the greatest temptation to run against. So he's saying, by making this clear that the people have a right to get rid of that is the surest way to prevent it from happening. That people, that once they know that if you do this, the people have a right to kick them out and then to reestablish a new legislature. See, this is a corrective, he argues here. That's right. And now let's go just to the last chapter, this last section, 227. We'll stop here. In both forementioned cases, when the legislature is changed, or the legislature acts contrary to the end for which they were constituted, those who are guilty of rebellion. For if anyone takes by force, if anyone by force takes away the established legislature of any society, and and the laws by them made pursuant to their trust. In other words, they've taken away the legislature, they've taken away the establishment, and they've taken away the laws made by them pursuant to their trust. He thereby takes away the umbrage, the umpire, which everyone had consented to for a peaceable dissolution of all their controversies, and a bar to the state of war amongst them. So therefore, if you violate, in other words, the legislator is the umbrage. This is the legislature is the umpire that's going to be the judge who will be the umpire about all these controversies that go in there. This is interesting. Locke here, I wrongly assumed one time there's no separation of judiciary and legislature. I always thought that the judiciary was more tied to the executive in that sense, but no, that Locke seems to really tie the real function of adjudication and umbrage of settling disputes with the legislature in this fundamental sense. And only then this cannot be done, or the means of it cannot be accomplished through legislature, then only then by the executive. This is a very interesting argument in that sense, that the judges are not really in that way judges in the proper sense, but rather executors of what has been judged. That is interesting in that sense. That makes sense in some aspects of the law. Take away that they who remove or change the legislative take away this decisive power, which nobody can. Okay, let's go this way. We talk about umbrage, to which everyone can stand to, and their peaceful decisions and the controversies by the state war. And they who remove or change the legislature take away this decisive power. In other words, decisive power that they set up a society to create an umpire, right? That the legislature is this umpire, and that by doing this, they who remove or change the legislature take away this decisive power, which nobody can have but the appointment and the consent of the people, right? And so destroying the authority which the people did and nobody else can set up, and introducing a power which the people have not authorized, they have actually introduced a state of war, which is that of force without authority. So the state of war is what? A force without authority. And that by doing something contrary to what the law is established, and like this, they set up a new authority. They destroy the old authority. They put a new authority up. They don't, or new body up, new legislature, a new thing. They had no authority to do that. And by doing this, they have done by force without authority, and therefore this is an act of war. This is by introducing a state of war. And thus, by removing the legislature established by the society, in whose decisions the people acquiesced and united as to that of their own will, they untie the knot and expose the people anew to the state of war. So therefore, in other words, the argument is once they do this, once they break the thing and they changed it without the consent of the people or the authority of the people, which the authority of people means the consent and agreement of the people for their benefit. Therefore, they've done that. They've untied the knot that holds everything together, and they reduce everything to the state of war. Okay, they expose anew to the state of war, And if those who by force take away the legislature are rebels, the legislature themselves, as have been shown, can be no less esteemed so, when they who were set up for the protection and preservation of people, their liberties and their property, shall by force invade and endeavor to take them away. And so they, putting themselves into a state of war, with whom they made the protectors and guarantors of their peace, are properly and with the greatest aggravation rebellant rebels, rebellant rebels, rebellant rebels. The greatest aggravation, rebellants and rebels. Okay, so therefore, who's the real rebels? The rebels are not the people opposing them, the unjust, unlike this. It's rather the people who acted wrongly and they took the thing and they untied the knot of the situation, untied the knot of society and of that, and they've reduced everyone back to a state of war. And therefore, this is and their purpose was what their legislature, and the legislature can do this also when they enact laws that he says that the legislature is as bad as this is when they design for the preserving of the people and their liberties and their properties, shall by force and invade and to endeavor to take them away. They put themselves in a state of war, who they were supposed to be with people who they were supposed to protect and secure their peace, right? They are the greatest rebels in that case. So let's end here. I'm going to stop here. And tomorrow we will finish up the second part, last section of the last chapter 19 on this dissolution of government. So we'll stop here. If you have any comments or questions, please put it below. If you like it, like it. If you have any, don't like it, you dislike it. Say why. Please tell me why. What's wrong? What can I do better? Maybe I can read better. Maybe I can not. Who knows? Again, I'll take criticism. Fair criticism is fair. Share with a friend, share with people you might know, post on social media to encourage others to come join us, or watch the previous videos even. You can subscribe and have them, maybe even have them subscribe to the channel. I need to build some up some more. You can follow me on social media, information below. You can become a contributor by Subscribestar or Patreon. Again, I'm not best on this. I'm doing things. If I get more, I do more. That's it for now. So I'll see you tomorrow. Is the last day of our session on Locke, and we'll end Locke. Okay. Take care. Have a good day.